Hello, everyone. Good morning, West Coast. Good afternoon, Central US and East Coast and most of Mexico. Good evening, Europe. My name is Alex Ramirez, and today I am proud to be among such a great team of accomplished professionals from different sectors of the artificial intelligence and robotics industry. Today, we are all joining forces to bring you a webinar full of valuable information. This pandemic, in many ways, has limited us, but in other ways, is opening the doors to new ideas, new ways of working, and is accelerating the adoption of technology in ways that we never expected or could have predicted. We will get answers to such questions as what challenges lie ahead for the manufacturing industry? Why is digital transformation more important than ever? What can AI do for your manufacturing corporation? Why should you build your own AI platform as soon as possible? How will robots make operations more efficient and increase safety? How will AI and robotics reduce costs and increase quality? Ultimately, we will understand how robotics and AI will help manufacturing corporations to compete, survive, and ultimately thrive in a post-pandemic world. I will introduce each member of the panel quickly and let them say some initial words. And let's start with Jeff Burnstein, joining us from Michigan. He is the president of the Association for Advancing Automation. If you don't see him until talking about automation, you will find him discussing future automation events or creating new forums for automation companies in the field of robotics, motion controls, and computer vision. So they have an opportunity to showcase their technology to the rest of the world. Jeff, we're very happy to have you here. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm excited to be here, and you put together a great panel. I'm happy to say that all the panelists, including CrowdANALYTIX, their companies are members of the association, so we're happy about that. And it's what you said is right. A lot of challenges right now because of the pandemic, but tremendous opportunities have emerged, and I'm excited to hear everyone talking about what they see, because this is a time like we've never seen before, and automation has a very important role to play going forward. And our association is doing everything we can to help companies through this so that they're positioned for success on the other side.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Let me stop sharing this slide here. Very good. The next person I will introduce is Jerry Chang. He is the head of Global Business Development, Manufacturing and Industrials at NVIDIA. He helps corporations with the adoption of NVIDIA technologies to deploy large-scale AI initiatives. Jerry, welcome. We are glad to have you here with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. And thanks, everyone else, for joining this webinar. The first thing I'd like to say is that obviously some of the biggest manufacturers have been really badly impacted by this pandemic. And there's been a human cost to this pandemic on so many levels. But we found that many of these challenges have actually been a driver to accelerate their adoption for AI. And of course, their first priority is always worker safety. And as it turns out, we've seen that AI vision systems are really good at detecting things like elevated body temperatures or verifying that personal protective equipment's being worn, or even flagging insufficient social distancing or unsafe activities. But even more than that, fundamentally, we found that manufacturers have needed to rethink their operations from first principles. And usually they come to the conclusion that the payoff for digital transformation is happening when smarter and more autonomous systems can be deployed, because human operators aren't able to physically access the plant nowadays. So let me mention a few examples. So we're seeing a lot more urgency to deploy autonomous systems for material handling in manufacturing facilities. And other examples that we're seeing a lot of smart inspection systems at the nanoscale in semiconductor and electronics organizations. There's so many companies that are investing in this type of innovation, and I think it's because they're thinking that they want to be able to snap back quickly from this pandemic even stronger and better than before. So we're hoping that a lot of these investments will pay off in the near term.
Thank you, Jerry. Excellent. Now, next in line is Juan Aparicio. He is the head of advanced manufacturing automation for Siemens Corporate Technology. He leads a team of researchers and engineers in the area of robotics and AI. He's working to make industrial robots skilled enough to do human tasks in environments such as factories, warehouses, and even farms. He is one of the winners of Innovators Under 35 Europe from the MIT Technology Review in 2019, and also part of the A3's Strategic Committee on AI. Juan, it is great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex. And it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and also share the stage with Jeff and Jerry, because this is really an example of the people that are driving the next generation of robotics and AI into manufacturing. As you said, I work for Siemens, this small company that has been around for 170 years or more, right? It's 170 years startup, as it feels. And we have been around since after the first industrial revolution and been part of the second, the third, and now the fourth one. And I think what has really happened with COVID is that this crisis has pushed the forward button, right? The fast forward button into Industry 4.0. A lot of concepts that people were discussing, like having more flexibility into manufacturing or having a strategy for digitalization, this is really speeding up, because now, before it was a nice to have, now it's a necessity. So it's going to be an interesting panel. It's going to be exciting, and I hope we can discuss already some interesting use cases to keep our workers safe, and on the other side, to keep production going using robotics and flexible automation.
Thank you, Juan. Finally, we have Divya Mishra, the CEO of CrowdANALYTIX, a worldwide leading company in the field of AI. He is the man who has successfully put together crowdsourcing and artificial intelligence. Many have tried and failed, but he did it. Now, with a team of about 25,000 data scientists behind him, he is ready to go after any AI project. He has successfully developed AI solutions for corporations and multinational companies in the Americas, Europe, and Asia, across many industries, and for more than 7 years already. Divya, thank you for being here with us today, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. And as other panelists have already shared, the pandemic has fundamentally changed the way manufacturing is going to work going forward. Some of the things that are changing around, as Jerry mentioned, having to manage manufacturing plants remotely, or trying to think of different ways of adapting to this change, focusing less perhaps on efficiency of supply chains and more on adaptability of these supply chains, are some of the fundamental changes that are going to outlast this pandemic, and hopefully we'll get to talk more about it as part of this discussion. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Divya. Excellent. Before I engage the panel, I want to let the audience know you can ask questions through the webinar application that you have in your computer, and we will be happy to consider them. And if we, for some reason, do not have the time to discuss your particular question, we promise you we will send you the answer by email. So please feel free to write your question at any moment. Also, we will be polling the audience a couple of times. One of them is going to be right now. You will see a question and just think of the option that is more relevant to you. So let me do that right now, and then you will see the question in your screen. And I will give you a little bit of time to answer. So as you answer, I will keep going. Stop sharing here. Okay, stop. So I will start with Jeff. Jeff, what do you see happening in the manufacturing industry right now after COVID-19? And what are the challenges you see manufacturing corporations will face after the pandemic? And how do you see robotics and AI helping? And when I say manufacturing industry, I encompass industries such as automotive, electronics, pharmaceutical, biotech, and even perhaps food processing and packaging. Let us know.
Well, I mean, you could have included a whole range of industries, manufacturing and non-manufacturing, just about every industry. It's funny because Juan said that we've hit the fast forward button, and I think he's right. When we first surveyed our members and others who visit our website at the beginning of the pandemic and said, what do you see the impact of the pandemic on your automation strategy? About 20% of the people indicated that it would lead to greater adoption going forward. Another survey came out shortly after us and it said maybe 25%. The most recent polls that I've seen indicate, or surveys, that maybe as much as 50% of the companies plan to increase their adoption of automation going forward. And I think just about every company is going to need to. I mean, obviously there are some sectors of the economy that are doing well right now. If you're making toilet paper or Clorox wipes, life is good. You need automation in order to keep up. But if you're struggling, this is where the problem comes in. If you're in an industry where right now things aren't so good, you're going to need automation, but maybe you don't have the resources, maybe you don't have the capital to invest. So we're going to have to find new ways to, maybe it's robotics as a service or other ways to make sure companies can afford to automate. Because I think many companies are looking at this and saying, we can't just look at the ROI. This is going to change the way we operate going forward. We have to make the investment. And this is something that I think every company is going to come to that conclusion, that post-pandemic, the world has changed. We've seen the vulnerabilities by not having automation now. You talk about food processing. I mean, we're talking to Tyson Foods. They're going to be participating in Robotics Week. They're a great example of a company that they can't possibly do food processing the way they've been doing it if hundreds of people are going to catch the virus and shut them down. They're going to have to use automation. And so I think this is the challenge we're all facing. Yes, we know we need to do it. How do we afford it? How do we successfully apply it? And that's one of the things that they're looking to us for from an association standpoint, and all of you who have tools that can help them.
Excellent. Thank you for that very good answer. And I want to share the poll. 50% of the people voted, and 20% mentioned that safety is important to them. 5% said that they want to reduce costs. 30% they want to see how they can leverage automation, and 55% they said all of the above. So all these subjects are important to everyone. Okay, I will go with Juan. One of the challenges manufacturing corporations will face when their personnel returns from isolation is dealing with the precautions to touch, grasp, and manipulate objects. Some manufacturing processes require a high level of interaction among humans. How could robots help?
Thank you, Alex, for the question. I think it's a very important topic to also understand what can be the role of robots in this pandemic and also post-pandemic world. Hopefully, we will arrive to that world one day. So, starting with in the pandemic, I think it's as people in the poll answer, it's very important to keep people safe. We need to be able to respect social distancing, and also make sure that our people, our workers are safe when they are working in manufacturing, right? And it's also one role of the robots that we have seen, and we have seen it successfully arising in this pandemic, are robots that help us, for example, disinfect, either UV light robots or robots that spray chemicals, right? Leveraging all the advances in advanced mobile robots and perception in order to really keep the environment at a safe level. And I think from the expectations that we had pre-pandemic, this has really met the expectations, right? There are many companies arising with solutions to say, either for hospitals or manufacturing, that really leverage this AMR, AGV knowledge from many years and put it in good use. For example, we had a firefighting robot that was used in China. We could quickly transform that also to spray chemicals in hospitals and keep also at least all the surfaces safe from bacteria. And that's one example, right, where I think I can say that robotics were up to the task. On the other side, we have also the traditional robotics, right, the traditional automation that has been very good at automating predictable stuff, right? But where we really needed all these robots to produce something else, right, to quickly, for example, stop producing cars, start producing PPE, that didn't happen, right? Because we didn't have that flexibility embedded in our automation robotic system. It's very important to understand that automation and robotics have been very good at automating the predictable, things that you can predict, that you can model. But so far, all the flexibility has been put into the hands of humans, right? If you go to an automotive plant, you see that actually over the years, the amount of people have increased at the same time that the robots have increased, right? And this is because you need that flexibility. Yes, the initial assembly and the painting is done by robots, but then later on, all the assembly is done by humans. What is really important now, what has happened is that flexibility that was needed, it needs to happen. It cannot come from humans anymore. It has to come from robotics and automation. So that's a shift from automating the predictable to really autonomizing or automating the unpredictable. Things that humans are very good. And that's where machine learning, digitalization, and other techniques can help in this journey. It's a journey, as I said, that a lot of people were thinking, and now we don't have another option but to do that. We need robots that are able to pick different objects and place different objects as humans do. You will be surprised that there are some studies that said 38% of all the activities that people do in manufacturing is simply moving stuff from one place to another, from a bin to a machine. Those kind of activities can be already automated, and we should start that journey. Other things like quality inspection, manipulation, as Jeff said before, also even food, manipulating food, right? We may be not ready today, but this is the moment to start the journey with partnerships to arrive there as quick as possible. So in a nutshell, I think, as Jeff said, this pandemic has created a lot of, it's a crisis, right? It has put us to our knees. But at least I think two things can come out good from that. One of them is really demystifying the role of robotics. It hasn't been a super intelligent AI that has really put us to our knees. It has been a virus, right? Where are all these terminators, right? It hasn't been that. It's science fiction. And the second one, as you said, is creating more opportunities for robots and automation, because now more than ever is the time to build. It's the time to build factories, to build automation, and to build flexibility into our system.
You're excellent, very good. Now, question for Jerry. From your perspective as an AI microprocessor manufacturer and at the heart of the digital transformation and AI revolution, how has the pandemic affected the manufacturing industry And from your perspective, what could help the manufacturing industry get back on track?
Yeah, I think as a lot of the other panelists have said before, we find that a lot of our customers and our partners, they really are rethinking fundamentally their manufacturing processes. There's a lot of appetite, there's a lot of demand and appetite for investing in AI. And when they speak to us, I think their first expectation when they approach us is that they do think of us maybe at first glance as a semiconductor process manufacturer. But we've actually found that it's actually not enough to be just a sort of a silicon provider, a component provider. It just isn't sufficient to get our customers and our partners rolling. What they really need is our assistance to build their solutions on top of a complete full stack approach. And that's what we've been striving to provide. So it's probably a surprise to a lot of people that most of our engineering staff is actually in software development, not in hardware or silicon development. And it's for this reason exactly. We want to provide an easy platform for our downstream customers and partners to build the things that are unique and solve their unique problems and work in their unique environments. The other thing we found is that in the end, the investment in the infrastructure, in the hardware infrastructure, actually that kind of pales compared to their investment in the research and development for their own efforts. You don't want to have your research and development teams kind of hopping around, trying lots of different approaches to solve a variety of different problems. In the end, you want your research and development team to be able to leverage a lot of their efforts across multiple application workloads. And that certainly includes AI, especially nowadays. But we found that they've also started to include things like HPC, traditional HPC. Sometimes they're even augmenting that with AI optimization methods. And then, of course, graphics, which is, of course, our historical origin. So yeah, there's a lot going on that we see, but we think that we need to bring to market something a lot more than just the silicon ourselves.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Now let's go with Divya. Divya, how can artificial intelligence help manufacturing companies to succeed after returning from quarantine?
A great question, Alex. In fact, before I get into how AI can help, I think it's important to understand, a couple of completely unavoidable shifts that have happened as a result of the pandemic, and that's creating a need for AI. The first is obviously, having to work remotely because of the safety concerns that everyone talked about, basically means you have to understand it's not easy to monitor these systems remotely unless you have access to data. And suddenly all of the manufacturing companies are realizing that their lack of investment in good structured data coming from different parts of their manufacturing plant, and these are signals from their machines, their hydraulics, or any of the aspects of the manufacturing plant. If they're not getting the data in a good structured manner, there is no way of really monitoring it. So they suddenly realize that they want to monitor it remotely, but they're not able to. So that's the first challenge. The second is, for a very long time, right, manufacturing has been about efficiency, right? And efficiency leads to primarily reduction in cost. Reduction in cost leads to dependence on China, frankly, right? So primarily on China. Now, that's not bad until you have a black swan event like this one, right? The issue is you can always have, it's a lot easier to control the demand side challenges because you can invest in marketing, you can invest in a whole bunch of things, and you can stimulate demand. Nobody really has any control over supply chains unless they have invested in long term in having all of the pieces in place to handle situations like this. And now if your supply chains are extremely efficient, it means that the moment that efficient supply chain breaks down, you're done. So there is going to be a move towards adaptability, resilience, redundancy. They are counter efficiency think about it, right? Redundant, any system that's adaptable requires redundancy, and redundancy is not cheap. But redundancy allows you to handle situations like this. So what I mean by redundancy is being able to figure out where your bottlenecks are in your supply chain, having alternatives, having local alternatives where possible, are all things that manufacturing companies are going to think about. So where does AI come in? Getting to the question that you had, I think AI is going to be applied in two waves, in my view. Okay, the first wave is going to be about structuring this data, building the foundations of getting all of your data in a form that all sorts of predictive quality, like Juan mentioned, early detection of quality issues, any sort of production faults, even preventive maintenance of your entire facilities, maintenance of your products after they have been released. None of that is possible unless you have good structured data, and getting that data foundation in place requires effort. And frankly, there are a lot of interesting, lot of the developments in AI around deep learning, and I'm sure Jerry would agree with me on this, have been in methods that allow you to structure or label or tag unstructured information in the form of images, in the form of videos, in the form of IoT signals, sensors. For example, a sensor may give you the temperature, but what does that temperature mean depends on the situation and the application, right? And someone needs to do that translation. So first level of AI deployment is going to be about structuring and building the foundations of structuring the data. The second level is going to be about building the preventive and predictive and forecasting models on top of that data. So these things are going to happen. The supply chain issues cannot be resolved easily, but it's very difficult for a human to manage and identify all of the bottlenecks in a supply chain. And that's where machines are going to automate that process and help you do scenario planning, figure out what the best decisions are in updating your supply chain and so on. So those are the two different ways in which AI will get applied, in my view.
Thank you, Divya. And I want to share that somebody saying that we have a lot of background noise in the conversation. So maybe if we turn some of our microphones off while we're not talking might help. So I will go with Jeff now. A question for Jeff. What are the current and future uses of robotics in a manufacturing environment, and how are they helping companies to reduce operational costs while increasing quality?
Well, I mean, the current uses are traditional ones that we've seen in assembly, material handling, welding, material removal, machine loading, all the, traditional application areas we're seeing robots used in. What's different now is we're seeing them used also in different ways. So Juan talked about the importance of flexibility. So with the explosion in use of autonomous mobile robots and collaborative robots, you're able to do some of these tasks differently and more flexibly. For instance, you can do now things like welding with collaborative robots, or you can put a robot on top of an autonomous mobile robot and move it from station to station so that you don't have to retool every line. So I think companies are getting smarter about how to apply robotics, and those are in traditional applications. But what about these new areas? Come up a couple times about using robots to disinfect with UV light, using robots as floor cleaners. We're seeing more and more of that. One thing that companies in big warehouses are seeing is that a lot of the products are being touched. When you, for instance, in warehousing, if you order something from Amazon, I'm told that the product is touched 22 times before it reaches your house. Well, in a pandemic world, you want to reduce those touches. So how can you use automation to reduce that number of touches? That's where issues like safety come to the forefront. Safety's always been the #1 issue in robotics. It's just changed now. So when you look at what the future uses are going to be, whether it's manufacturing or any other space, it won't just be the traditional ones. It'll be all this collecting data, all the making sense of the data, all the safeguarding, cybersecurity, all the things that we need to do to operate efficiently. Robots are going to play a part. And it's not just robots, it's machine vision, it's AI, it's all the technologies that companies need to adopt. We just have to make it so that it's easy enough to do and affordable.
Thank you, Jeff. And we are getting quite a few questions, so let's try to speed up the pace and consider maybe some of those questions at the end. So Juan, Divya touched on an interesting point, the data. From your point of view, are manufacturing corporations now, after a few years of installing all kinds of sensors, IoT devices, and SCADA systems, really taking advantage of all the data generated by them? Do you see room for improvement?
Thank you, Alex. That's a good question, right? Because there are a lot of trends now, like really colliding and bringing us to the future. One of them is obviously robotics and flexible automation. The other one is industrial Internet of Things, right? If we think about traditional Internet of Things with more sensors monitoring the environment, the same can be applied in the industry domain. Now, when we go to a factory, right, there is not only new sensors added there, right? The reality is that there is a lot of brownfield, a lot of already existing machines there that we cannot throw away, right? So people that really want to go to the next level and say, okay, can I do predictive maintenance? Can I do more interesting analytics? The first problem that they face is, can I actually get the data out of my machine? Right? It's not always possible. The second thing is, I mean, what has happened lately with artificial intelligence and more machine learning is that we think that more data is better, right? If I have enough data, I can control my processes. But that's not always the case, right? In a lot of cases, if we just take a look at the data in itself, it's actually a problem, right? You need to think about the storage, you need to think about securing that. So what you really want is smart data. What you really want is insights. It's a way to merge that data with domain knowledge. That's what really will bring benefits. In that sense, there are kind of two different applications: the traditional data science optimization of cycle, some things that Divya has already said, and they are very interesting, like how do you identify bottlenecks in your supply chain with enough data? How do you optimize the operations? Can I use also to trace back, right? If one of my team members is, for example, has been diagnosed with COVID, can I trace back all the iterations of that person, right? Can I record all that data? That's one aspect where I think machine learning and AI can really do a lot of, make a lot of progress. On the other side, you have the embodied world, right? The control side of things. And that's where things get a little bit tricky, where also manufacturers don't want to just put all the data into the cloud. You want to have everything on my premise because this is my bread and butter. And that's where a lot of technologies like creating synthetic data or all sorts of techniques will help, because we need to add flexibility, right? We need to add, as we said before, more flexible automation systems. But I would also like to remark that AI is not just a magic tool that will make everything work. It's this digitalization process, adding the good old-fashioned control and domain knowledge. Put on top these machine learning techniques that are also computing and data hungry, but that can give you the flexibility, but also leverage your digital information that you have. You have most likely all the CID files of what you are assembling. You have a lot of digital information from different parts of your operation. Use that also during operation. Like really bring all these digital threads together to create these digital twins that for a long time were just a hype, but now they are more needed than ever, right? Because a lot of times we are not even in the factories anymore, right? We have to reason with our digital models. Like I cannot tell you enough how hard was for us not have access to our robots in the lab, and the only way that we could move these new technologies was with these digital twins, these digital models that are as realistic as possible.
Thank you, Juan. We appreciate that answer. Question for Jerry now. As teams work remotely, can you talk about the NVIDIA Grid for manufacturing and how it enables real-time collaboration? Could you mention examples of NVIDIA technologies that you see benefiting manufacturing? And also from your perspective, how do you see the present and future of robotics in manufacturing?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'll answer it this way, especially since we're on the topic of digital twins and how they apply to robotics. One thing that I'm actually really excited about personally for the future of robotics is to move beyond kind of the fixed function robots that we have now, which are fine for what they do. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's a space of applications that it's been difficult to address so far because these systems simply aren't able to learn, and that's the exciting future that I'm really looking forward to, is the ability for these autonomous systems to be able to learn from their mistakes and also learn from their successes. There's actually a growing field in machine learning that you guys, I'm sure, have heard of, called reinforcement learning. The idea here is that the robot can learn from both its mistakes and its successes, as I mentioned. But the problem is that if you have a robot that's sort of doing this type of experimentation in the real world, in a real factory environment, obviously it's extremely dangerous and fairly destructive, not just for the robot, but for its surrounding environment, including the people potentially in the environment. So one approach that we've seen, and we've been actually investing quite a bit in, is the idea to create a digital twin of the robot itself, and then to insert that digital twin of the robot into a digital twin of the factory environment. And this this sort of sets up a sandbox for the robot to make all of its mistakes safely in this virtual environment that simulates all the physics and all the visual characteristics and the perception characteristics of the real environment. And now if this simulation is realistic enough so that you've taught the robot the right lessons in this virtual environment, then when you take the robot out of this simulation and put it in the real world, it can apply everything that it's learned potentially at super real time in this virtual space, and then apply it safely and productively in the real world. So that's an area that I'm actually quite interested in, and we're actually investing quite a bit of resources for our own purposes as well as for our partners.
Thank you, Jerry. Divya, the next question is for you. Why is it so important for a manufacturing company to start the adoption of AI as soon as possible, and how can they do it? Probably that's the most important question. You're muted.
Yeah. So thanks, Alex. I think by now, after everyone has shared their thoughts, it's pretty obvious why this adoption is needed right away. But I think how is a better question, and I would like to take up the thoughts shared around digital twins. Even before talking about how we think of digital twins, just for the audience, maybe there are different types of people logged in today. The way we define digital twins is basically it's a representation of the components and all of the dynamics of any system, right, in as much detail as possible. Now, in order for you to do that, imagine the complexities of doing that. And I'm sure the kind of horsepower that NVIDIA and others enable today, this can be done in much better than let's say a few years back. But even then, what a twin means not only depends on the components and the dynamics of that particular system, but also depends on the applications that you're dealing with, right? So the parameters that you actually extract and the way you structure those parameters depends a lot on the applications. So there is a need today, again, I may be repeating this, but it's worth repeating, to come up with digital twins, not just of the product as it is generally referred to in most conversations, but also the process, the plant, the entire manufacturing supply chain requires these digital twins. Not just that, the digital twins need to be aligned to the use case or the application that you're talking about. So we are talking about building this foundational cloud of digital twins before any sort of AI can be done. So if you ask me what needs to be done today, today the first place everyone needs to invest in is in building this foundation of digital twins, having clarity on what your business challenges are, and making sure that the twins that you build are aligned to those challenges and are not, because the moment you start viewing this as a generic problem, you can understand how complex systems can be, and you can quickly get lost in collecting information that you don't really need. So that's, I would say, should be the first step, and that needs to happen right away in all organizations.
Okay, Divya. I am launching the second poll. So I will just give a few seconds for the audience to answer. And while they answer, I will go to Jeff. Jeff, among a percentage of the population, there is a belief automation destroys jobs. Unfortunately, this belief sometimes is even fueled by the media. Do you see this translating to the top echelons of corporations management and affecting decisions to adopt automation? Have you seen this happening? Could you tell us if such beliefs are well-founded? And could you mention some scenarios, perhaps? What would your message be to workers and management?
Well, thanks for that question. It's probably the question that I deal with more than any other. Our opinion and strongly held belief is that robots and AI and the other technologies that we represent save and create jobs, because we believe that the real threat to jobs is when companies can no longer compete. Automation helps companies compete and saves jobs, but it also creates better jobs. So instead of jobs where you're doing dull, dangerous, and dirty things, or things that can be easily automated, you can create jobs that allow you to use your brain more and allow you to do safer, better, higher paying jobs, jobs that add more value to the company. And actually, I think the pandemic has added yet another reason for companies to want to automate, and that's to safeguard their workers. The worst thing you can have happen is that you're bringing people into unsafe situations. So you used to put fences around robots, and now robots can work safely around people, but you don't want people working around people as much anymore during this pandemic era. So creating social distancing by using robotics will be very helpful. Reducing touches will be very helpful. As far as how the upper echelons of corporate America or global corporate leaders feel, I think that message has resonated with them. I think maybe years ago, there was more concern about automation replacing jobs. But look at what's happened over the last decade, Alex. During the pre-pandemic period, the use of robots accelerated to a point that had never been seen before. And in the United States, we implemented more robots in the past decade than we had by far before that. And yet unemployment fell to record lows. And I think it opened up the eyes of corporate leaders and frankly to people that we can increase the number of jobs even as we increase automation, because we're becoming more productive and better able to compete. And the other issue is, what if you don't? What if you don't take advantage of the best tools available to you? Your competition is going to. That competition may be in China, it may be in India, it could be anywhere in the world. They are going to take advantage of these technologies. And I think more and more American companies are realizing that. And it's not just large companies. It's small and medium-sized companies today too. And it's not just automotive or electronics. In fact, the biggest users now, or the fastest growing number of users, are in general industry, all these other industries that had never adopted automation before, or at least not in great numbers. They're the ones looking to automate. And that's my message to people who are concerned, is that they ought to see this as these technologies is helping them do their jobs better, more safely, and actually giving them more opportunities going forward, not less.
Thank you, Jeff. Now I will go to Juan. Juan, we have been playing with this concept for some years. Will we ever see a truly smart factory?
That's a good question, right? And before I get into that, I would also go back to Jeff's point on how robots create jobs. I'm actually hiring. So it's actually, I'm hiring a lot of people, a lot of researchers, a lot of engineers to tackle the problems that we are seeing right now on adding more flexibility into robots to cope to the COVID pandemic. So it's really a good example on how more robots also means more people. We never think about also the entire life cycle of the automation world, right, on the manufacturing, and how we are moving people just doing repetitive tasks to more productive. Now, to your question, Alex, on a smart factory, I think we have to define what smart means, right? And if we think about the smart as just machines that can learn on their own and produce unanticipated results, I don't think people really, like a human could do, right? I don't think we really want to have machines that do unanticipated results, right? That tells you that you cannot really control, right? That's the opposite of what we want. You think about that, right? It's counterintuitive, right? When we think about what is smart versus not, I'm sure that any machine out there can beat me at chess, right? But I haven't seen a robot that goes out into a cell, takes the chess board, and starts playing with me, removing all the pieces one by one, right? That's the complicated part, the dexterity, not so much the intelligence as we think as humans, right? So to me, smart really means flexible. If I can add, when are we going to see more flexible factories? When are we going to see a factory that today is producing electronics, and tomorrow we need it to produce PPE, we need it to manufacture masks? Can you really easily do the change? And in that sense, it's two ways. It's from the engineering side, which takes a lot of effort today, right? Most of the cost when you want to automate is not on the equipment itself, but the engineering time that comes associated to that. So can we reduce that? Can we make machines that do plug and produce, that you just modular machines that you plug and it suddenly works? And in operation, that's where you want the flexibility. That's what you want, more and more systems to automate and predictable. And it's really slowly, but very fast up to now. Now, going back to the analogy of fast forwarding, happening. Like we are seeing robots really peaking in the holy grail of robotics that was been peaking for a long time. Now is solved, right? Now we are moving also on the placing side of things, on the assembly side that also requires even finer manipulation. But technology is catching up. Now it's a matter of robustifying that technology and making it available to the masses. And it's not only the algorithmic side, right? It's also, I think, Divya really hit the nail on the top, is really thinking about the entire strategy. How do you link data? What happens if this machine is a little bit more autonomous and I cannot say that I produce 40 parts per minute, but it's a stochastic process? How do I account for that? What happens if my supply chain is also not as controlled as before? All these things come into play, and you need to think about this holistic approach and think it end to end, so you don't have problems in the future just because you didn't think it now.
Thank you, Juan. Excellent. Now, a question for Jerry, and we are actually running out of time. We can talk about AI and robotics all day long. Why companies serious about digital transformation and AI need to have a well thought out GPU infrastructure, and what would this look like for a typical manufacturer?
Okay, well, thanks for that question. So from our perspective, of course, I think ultimately it's like what Divya said in this earlier statement there. Ultimately, your business requirements are going to drive the right architecture for your infrastructure. But as it turns out, what we have observed is that modern manufacturing is saturated with so much data nowadays. And as it turns out, we've since the beginning of the company actually have built an architecture that's designed for parallel throughput processing, both for computing as well as for networking. And so it's capable of ingesting and processing and then learning from all of this data. Now, you can say the same for not just for classic AI applications, but a lot of the other major computing workloads that we see in manufacturing. So it's not just AI, but as I mentioned earlier, also high performance computing and design and visualization. So what do I mean by that? Well, on the AI front, if you just look at all the top published research in the biggest conferences nowadays, the GPUs have become kind of a standard for modern AI, not just to train the systems, but also to run these systems, to run the predictions, to do the inference, and that's true as well in the factory environment. And of course, that's also been true for HPC, especially in the most recent cycles, where in fact GPUs now power 8 of the 10 fastest supercomputers in the world. And then, of course, because of our origin, we're obviously necessary for visualization. So I'd say that it's actually the flexibility of GPUs for all of these different workloads that allow them to address all these major applications, and kind of has made them the best architecture that we've seen many of our manufacturing partners deploying. And frankly, it's just because you can get the most bangs for across the board for your buck. And that's actually really exciting to us. It's always exciting for us to find a new workload that we haven't thought of before, and then maybe we can do something to tweak our architecture a little bit and help our partners.
Thank you, Jerry. Divya, what are the different advantages and disadvantages between an out-of-the-box AI solution sold as a product or a service and a custom-made AI solution?
Yeah, I mean, great question, Alex. I think it's if anyone has done any sort of AI development, they probably understand this. There are a lot of pre-trained models, and in fact, we are building several pre-trained models in collaboration with NVIDIA and many other partners. But the pre-trained models are at a certain level of precision. Unless these algorithms can be at a precision that's better than human beings, you're not going to be able to trust them to do any of your work. And if you can't trust them, they're not going to be deployed in production. Unfortunately or fortunately, unlike other software, which is hard-coded, any AI model learns based on patterns and data that it finds. That's how machine learning works. And with things like reinforcement learning, as Jerry mentioned, it tries to optimize a certain objective based on a bunch of failures that it goes through over time. Now, unless an algorithm gets to train on specific data sets, specific scenarios of each manufacturer, it's not going to be of a precision that you can really rely on, right? So that's the issue. I mean, you cannot have a plug-and-play black box solution deployed in your organization. It just is not going to work. It's going to get you, to a certain level, but it's not going to get you to a production-ready situation. So customization is a must. The last mile has to be customized. That's been our experience so far. And that's the reason, customization of AI models specific to your business is very, very important.
Thank you, Divya. And the last question for everybody. Let's start with Jeff. Jeff, if you could recommend one thing for manufacturing companies to do right now that will help them with the new reality and even give them an advantage over the competitors, what would that be and how could they do it?
I'll be quick on this one because I know we're running out of time, but I would encourage them to learn about best practices, what successful companies are doing with automation that has made them successful. That's why we have a bunch of virtual conferences coming up, Robotics Week in September, AI and Smart Automation Week in October, autonomous mobile robots, robot safety, all these issues, motion control, vision, all these technologies we have great resources on. I would encourage companies to reach out to us and our members, and we can help. And also take advantage of the system integrator community, people who are providing solutions on a regular basis for companies that are facing these challenges. There are more than 150 to 200 of them in our association alone who can help.
Thank you, Jeff. Juan, same question for you.
I think, just to echo all the thoughts that were thrown during this hour, it's really important to have a partner that can get you along the way, along this journey. It's a journey. It's a partner that has to understand also the complexities of automation and artificial intelligence and what needs to happen next. It's a partner that understands also the digital world, but also the physical one, two parts that come together more and more. Also think about your needs, these needs of customization for what you really need. It doesn't make sense to pay more, that the vision system costs more than the entire automation system, right? It has to make sense for what you really need. You really need a supercomputer in your factory, or you just need a small module that can run inference of neural networks, but right there, close to your process. We are happy to be that partner, and we are happy also to think about this out of the box scenarios where autonomy, where AI mix with automation and data, and also it's time to build, so it's time to do it together also. No company can do it alone, so let's do it together.
Thank you, Juan. Jerry, same question for you. One thing you could recommend to manufacturing companies to do right now?
Yeah, so my recommendations, I think, is actually very practical, and that's that I think too often these digital transformation and AI efforts, sometimes they forget to take into account from the beginning the people who are the most familiar with how the physical systems work. And there's so much tribal domain expertise with all this complex machinery that it's difficult to bridge the gap between the cyber and the physical without involving the experts in those physical systems from the very beginning. And now once you do have that right team that can represent both sides of it, then you can start crafting your data strategy. And so what I'd recommend there is just don't be afraid of the size of the data. Sometimes people tend to be, they treat it as a problem rather than the value here, because you can never have enough data from what we've seen. And data is the necessary fuel for all of these AI projects to succeed. The whole point of machine learning and AI is that it learns from these subtle characteristics in the world, and it can't learn from that without the right type of and the right amount of data to pick up those kinds of insights. And so it's never too late to get started, both with your team as well as for your data strategy.
Thank you, Jerry. Divya, same question.
I would say invest in digital twins of your entire manufacturing process, because without that, none of the AI solutions that you probably require can be built. So make that investment, and if you need to know how to do that, contact us.
Thank you. We have a few questions. Some of them are very specific to machine vision and how to integrate a system. I will forward those to Juan. But there is one that is a little generic, and maybe either one of you can answer. It says, with the present supply chain disruptions, what is missing for the recovery for a full North American production integration? And I think we touched a little bit on that. Any one of you want to take that question?
We need to start offshoring more and more. Build in the US is becoming more and more important. For 20, in Silicon Valley, for 20 years, we didn't look at the problem of manufacturing. Manufacturing is hot again, and we have to bring more and more, have more and more control of our supply chain in the US.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Juan said there, and we're observing this across the board. There's a much bigger emphasis now for essentially onshoring their upstream supply chain, and that's something that we're following very, very closely.
Excellent. And I have a poll question, the last one, for anyone to respond. And I will be closing it soon. Well, Jeff, Juan, Gary, Divya, thank you very much for your answers, for your participation, and also thanks to all who attended this webinar. We had some glitches with the sound, but I think we shared very good information. We hope this information was very valuable to you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is alex@crowdanalytics.com. And finally, thank you, Catherine, our digital content manager, for her valuable support behind the scenes. You don't see her, but she's been working hard behind the scenes. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. All right. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye.